think it's good to, I know that you had an icebreaker already, but I think it's nice to introduce very briefly and be a bit specific about the topic as well. So my background is in business and IT. I applied for a job at IBM and started working in the Internet of Things practice. So this has a lot to do with sensor technology, the data you can collect from those sensors and the things that you can do with that data. Very briefly and generically described. And I've also organized a webinar for the youth time in preparation of this event actually. And I was wondering, maybe by raising your hand, how many of you have attended that webinar? All right, so there's 3. That's good to know, just as a basic understanding of what you know about the topic and the history behind the title of the workshop. So basically what I described when I refer to intelligent automation is that I can go in different directions, focus on the skills itself or an impact on the workplace or different examples and references of companies and organizations that are applying it. And basically I introduced 3 different directions that I could go into, and the audience then communicated a clear preference for exponential decision making. So basically the idea of how do we identify, and then I'll introduce the topic a little bit already. How do you identify emerging trends? Basically, how do you evaluate those trends? If it's meaningful, if it's valuable to you and your organization? And how do you give a follow-up based on what you just identified? But before we move into, because I have some flexibility and freedom also to change here and there, maybe the program, is to understand generically, maybe in 1 sentence, for you, what you know about AI, automation, IoT, and what you hope to learn from this session. That would help me to organize a little bit. Maybe you can start if you like.
With what?
So maybe in 1 sentence, what your background is related to the topic and what you hope to learn from this session.
Okay. Should I stand up?
1 sentence, quick and dirty.
Okay, well, my name is Dennis, so I'm finishing currently the double degree in finance and economics, and I was working for the investment bank in Helsinki. Also like seeing a lot of going on currently in the financial industry with the AI, and I also like was working for 1 startup in IoT before and e-learning.
What do you hope to achieve from this session?
From the session, I hope to kind of have maybe like a new perspective, understanding maybe something that I haven't seen before or never heard before.
Okay.
Some new, because you're like from the industry and you know a lot of much more than I do. So it's very interesting to know your opinion and what we're gonna expect in the near future, how it's gonna change the workplace. Yeah. So what should we be ready for? So should we probably learning something new? Already.
It is one, eh? Yes. Maybe in 1 sentence, quickly.
Yeah. It was 1 sentence. Done.
With
no
commas. Yeah, my name is Antonio. I'm the youngest participant here, I think. I'm here as a journalist.
Sorry to interrupt, because we have a lot of people in the class.
Yeah.
1 sentence. What kind of experience do you have with IoT and AI, and what do you hope to learn from this session?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with this topic, and I like to learn every time stuff, and so I hope I learn something new.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Tamara. I'm here as a journalist. I want to know more about how will the AI impact our jobs, because like I was covering that story for the news agency I work for, especially like how it affects like in fight of fake news and stuff like that. So I want to hear something new.
Interesting. Is anyone who can do it in 1 sentence? There you go.
Well done. I'm interested in smart homes and smart cars, and my experience with AI regards bias and filters, and that's it.
All right. Anyone else who would like to share interest, experience? Yeah?
Yeah. My name is Rustem. I studied in St. Petersburg. I studied automation of technological processes. So I want to know what exactly AI is, because it depends on definition of AI. It is changed from the past, because before it's a question of definition what intelligence is. So I want to know about new technologies that I can apply for in my work.
Very good question. I will start by talking about that a little bit. Anyone else? Maybe in the back?
Okay, I'm Maria. I was working at different conferences, and once I had a robot from Japan who was doing my job instead of me hosting people.
Yeah.
So I would like to know how we can prevent some jobs becoming redundant because of the AI.
Yeah. All right, cool.
The first victim of the progress.
What I will definitely do afterwards is share the link of the webinar. It's online, and some of those questions are also addressed in the webinar. Unfortunately, I cannot dive into everything like I mentioned, but what I can do, because I mentioned the agenda already, 3 different exercises as well, it will be an interactive session, is to give a very brief definition of at least the intelligent automation part of AI. So basically what I just introduced is the IoT part, sensoring, data gathering, and data analysis. And intelligent automation is basically an opportunity window or framework, I would say, for digital transformation that focuses on automating processes. Some processes are very repetitive, very easy to replace, for instance. Those are the first ones to be replaced by robotics. Can be either physical, but most likely digital robots. I don't know if anyone have heard about RPA, robotic process automation. I see one person nodding his head. Imagine that a office worker is copying and pasting information day in, day out from one software application to the other, performing the same repetitive task all over again, but is also smoking and taking breaks and sleeping a lot. And in terms of business efficiency, it's very costly. So what you can do is educate people within the company or hire external consultants who develop robots for you and actually replace that process by doing those repetitive tasks for you. That's a way of intelligently automating a process, right? Usually there's big data and analytics involved. You have those operations and processes, and those operations and processes are usually, if your company is well organized, supporting the goal or the strategy that you have, right? That's why those processes are there, because you want to achieve something. And the easier that process and the more repetitive that process, the easier it is to replace by intelligent automation. And in the end, it can transform, because if you really well understand your processes, you can see, for instance, where inefficiencies occur, and you can not just replacing the existing process, but also transforming the existing process, cutting corners, replacing certain tasks, these kind of things. So let me briefly introduce the first exercise, the first topic, as you will, of this workshop. So how do you identify emerging trends? I would say it all starts by developing a genuine interest in what's happening. So if you're a curious person, and it was mentioned already in the introduction, stay curious, stay engaged. If you want to understand what's happening around you, it helps a lot already. There's a lot of information on the internet, whether it's articles, newspapers, videos, documentaries, presentations, you can name it. It's all out there, it's available. That's why e-learning is becoming more popular, because people understand the value of open data, right? But of course, it should be complemented by the conversations you are having, for instance, with experts and people who know about certain technologies. And you can also derive valuable insights from machine data. So especially the airport that I'm currently working for, if they really well understand the number of people that are, of passengers that are arriving and departing in normal business days, but also in times of uncertainty right now, what's happening actually, what are the trends, how is this affecting the machines that we are using? The baggage tracks, for instance, what is their capacity? How can we reduce that? Can we reschedule our maintenance regarding to the, let's say, the reduction of planes that are arriving on a daily basis? If you gather a lot of data and retrieve valuable insights from those machines, you can change a lot, most likely in your favor if you have people who understand the technology. And what I will do is I will share, because I prepared some data sources for you, very generic in the beginning, and I was told that there would be 10 participants, so maybe you can share, because otherwise we won't make it. Maybe the 3 of you can work together. And please wear the face masks that you have, so we have no problem with collaboration. I think it's more fun to do it that way. And I will explain what the purpose is.
If we want to change one.
Everyone else. And now everyone changes.
So here's another one, and you can get it back.
And we got all separate.
Someone else? I have some spare ones. All right, guys, please your attention for a minute. So I gave you very generic information about IoT, Internet of Things, some trends, some articles, some messages that you could pick up when you're surfing on the internet, looking for something, and suddenly you come across these messages. And my question to you is just have a look at what's there. Try to understand what it means from a perspective of, I made the assumption that you're all European, from a European digital public officer. So let's say you're working for a government and you're surfing the internet, doing your job, maybe being distracted, and then you see IoT. Okay, what is this? So, and then the question is, is this a trend, basically, that I should pay attention to? So read what's there, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and see if there's a follow-up or some more information you would like to have based on this data sources. See already people using additional information sources, mobile phones. It's all allowed. All right, maybe what are your first insights? You can just think out loud. It's no competition. Still reading?
Basic insight is that you can see that IoT can be implemented in basically every single industry.
Yeah.
And if there's one that doesn't have enough spaces, it's because people haven't thought about it. Okay. That's a really quick assumption.
Okay. So I hear it can be relevant. Does it say something about public sector specifically?
I mean, the public sector at the very end has to make decisions for all the others. So definitely, I mean.
Do they?
Of course.
Why?
I mean, because it's in their responsibility to see that all sectors develop accordingly, to regulate that they are not abusing the system and so on. So
Okay.
they also wouldn't need politicians and politics, even though I'm not somebody that is likely into all this stuff.
I hear regulations. Do you think that the public sector was too slow to respond for Google Maps to collect data from their country, for instance?
Obviously. I mean, it's almost super slow, but yeah, in this case, it's a clear yes. Yeah.
IoT, cars, collecting data. All right, let's share some insights. Who thinks he or she has seen most of the data? Have you seen some interesting insights that might be relevant for a public sector officer?
I think that basically all the data we use, like we produce a lot of data, like the big footprint that we're using even when we just go into the internet.
Yeah.
We already produce a lot of data, and usually it's very sensitive data, and it's unprotected. So basically, yeah, it's a very big issue. So for European Digital Public Officer, you take care of the GDPR that was like implemented 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But still, like, you know, the only change was only this cookie thing. That's it. But the company is still like using the data, and yeah, they can misuse it, of course. What they're like successfully are doing still, and avoiding like paying tax on that. Yeah.
Maybe in this group, based on the information that you just read, do you think it can be of value to a government or to a city government to start working with IoT and why? Don't worry.
Right. I guess I'll answer. So, the obvious answer is definitely so. I mean, starting from traffic anti-congestion and up to automatization and whatever else, it's like the future, one direction or another.
Is there anyone who's questioning the sources?
I question since the very first beginning. I mean, in the second sentence of the entire paper, it says it treats IoT as a megatrend, which is already a completely subjective perspective, and it doesn't support it in any way. So, I mean, just by $200 billion, and I don't know if that's the adequate way to measure that's a megatrend or not. So, for me, I was super skeptic since the second sentence already.
I was skeptical from the beginning because because first of all we don't have any you know, the links from where this come from. We don't have the year, in which year, because like it says that in 2020 will be, but 2020 is already, and I know that actually IoT wasn't that successful as they were like thinking, let's say 5 years ago. 5 years ago, big corporates were like investing tremendous amount of money into IoT, but currently it didn't support the idea that IoT will be currently like a huge mega trend, that everybody will be affected by that. Still, like after 5 years, and there's so much money were like just, you know, blown at the wind. So it didn't. I'm like not supporting this idea.
Interesting. Maybe some.
I try to understand Exhibit 3 again and again. I don't know what's the point. I mean, usually you visualize to make things understandable.
Yeah, exactly.
What?
And this is more like visualizing for making it cool to watch.
Let me check with people I haven't heard. Maybe here in the front.
With Exhibit 3 referring to it, also to the job growth in Germany, the graph is a bit not so much understandable. To see what is exactly the impact or the categories of work. Of course, and with a graph, like what is the meaning, I mean, it's a bit difficult to understand.
So, and there was a question about how jobs will change, how it will impact the lives of people. intelligent automation. What do you think of Exhibit 5? Does it provide you some insights in...
Which one? Which is the
Should I show Let me check over here. Maybe? You've been able to have a look at Exhibit 5?
No, I was actually listening to them because I'm covering like
So what we see is the change of the, in terms of the daily work activities, technical and mechanical workers, for instance. How it can help them to perform their job and create some more time, some free time basically to perform value-adding tasks. Here? Yes.
My question is more about the impact of improving the task, as you say, because of course it's going to destroy some present jobs.
Yeah.
Will it really create more added value jobs, or is it just something that will disappear? So what is the capacity of our modern system to adapt to that, because the wages are always linked to activity, employed activity mainly.
Yeah.
And now we are going to have more tasks done by artificial intelligence or robots, automation. So how will we link the wages with activity of free time?
Okay.
So this is a big topic, I think.
It's also interesting to understand how resilient are organizations currently to adapt to this change if the technology is replacing their normal tasks of their employees. So how they react to this change? What are they doing with the workers then?
Yeah, very good questions. I think I can address them both. Please bear in mind your question till the end, because we need to move on to exercise 2 as well. So to begin with, as you see in Exhibit 2, there are research companies or research branches of large companies such as BCG who claim that the number of jobs will only increase. And it makes sense to a large extent if we look at computers, for instance. People were afraid that they would replace all jobs, but if we look at the number of jobs that are created based on new technology, and if we look at the number of jobs that are created to build those computers, to build actual technical infrastructure, it's likely that there will be a lot of new jobs. So what in the end the balance will be is a prediction. But it's very likely that it will for sure create a lot of new jobs. And what it's also likely is that it will first replace those jobs that are most easy to replace. Makes sense, right? And those can be very basic repetitive jobs, and you can debate whether that job is a job that people like. That's a very philosophical debate, and that's why we need a lot of thinkers, and why I personally believe that AI philosopher is the best job to have. Not claiming that I'm one, definitely something that I would like to develop myself into that direction, because you need a lot of thinking actually to design an environment in which it not just replaces jobs and creates a lot of value for shareholders and for management boards, but also creates new meaning for those people who lose part of their job. And that's a very interesting discussion you should have.
Yeah. What if the job of analyzing could be even replaced? Like being a lawyer or being philosopher could be replaced by artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Is it something possible? Is there any visibility on this possibility?
We can talk about it later. Yeah, sorry.
Can you, so just a good example, let's say with JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, let's say already like 3 or 4 years ago, they already introduced the,
progress, for sure.
the programs that actually 1 second of work of this program is actually equivalent to 13,000 working hours of lawyers and financial experts.
And this,
1 second.
This is an amazing example. Why? Because it's not just that the low-paid jobs will be replaced, but it's also the case that perhaps the most or the best paid jobs, in this case the investment bankers, are being replaced by some sort of cognitive intelligence, because they're able to scrape huge amounts of data and process that, find patterns within that data that people, individuals, could not even do. So it's, in that sense, a bit unpredictable, but what is sure is that some tasks will be replaced, complete jobs, just a few, but most likely parts of that job. And what the balance in the end will be is determined by the people themselves. I mean, what I heard someone saying is we can replace a job by making sure that that person takes on new responsibilities, and as soon as he or she takes on new responsibilities, we make sure that the previous job is automated. That's a way of thinking, that you don't take away the job, right? You just prevent others from being able to apply for that job because it doesn't exist anymore in that sense. And one thing I wanted to add, and then we move on to the next exercise, is that when I graduated and I was hired by IBM, this is the future, and I was thinking, very exciting about everything, and they said, so first of all, we know IoT for maybe 20, 30 years. There's nothing new about it. It's a term, it's a buzz, it's a lack of understanding most of the time. It's in a new jacket, basically. But IoT, measuring data, we know for ages, especially in the oil platforms, for instance, where safety is very important. So measuring things and doing something with that data is a very old-fashioned thing actually to do. But the way you do it and the way you kind of try to understand what's in front of you with that data, that's up to you, and that's why I, on purpose, did not put sources, to be very critical about what's there. Is it a buzz? Is it something real? And what's the added value from it? And that's what we will follow up on in exercise 2.
Yeah.
Very briefly, please.
Yeah. So let's say a lot of when it was a hype, like cryptocurrencies, so the same hype was with IoT, and then a lot of companies, so like some small startups, they were like raising money for useless products. Let's say in Finland they created a cup which connected to the Wi-Fi and sent the information about coffee you drink, like how many, what the temperature, like is it with milk or without milk, and like how much coffee do you drink a month, let's say. Like your personal cup, but it wasn't a boom. It wasn't a successful story.
Yeah. No, and that's an interesting example in the sense, if you look at it from the perspective of a city officer, you see different use cases, and we'll see in the next exercise as well. And somehow you need scale because you're responsible for a city, right? Let's say it's a large city and you want to implement different use cases in traffic, in waste management, in parking, and you name it, lighting, a very popular one. You need a generic platform that actually collects that data, protects that data, and gives you the opportunity to have new insights, right? And you cannot use a startup to build such a platform, right? So it's very sexy to have a startup, working with sensors and pulling here and measuring coffee, everything. But in the end, if we're talking about applying on a large scale to actually benefit a city or a big organization, you cannot play around. It's no play field. You need innovative ideas, but you need advanced and mature technology. And that's also what I wanted to show you a little bit in the next exercise. How do you evaluate trends, risks, and opportunities? Let's say you have identified a trend, Internet of Things might be valuable to your city. To your government, and you want to know more about it. So you start looking into different companies. As part of the market analysis, you start to compare vendors by looking at their websites. What can they provide in terms of value to our city? And the third one, you should always bear into mind when doing these kind of investigations, is being well aware who you are, who you're working with, and what your goals are. You read about industry. If IoT is such a value-adding proposition to industry, why as a city officer, when I'm not industry, we can debate about that, but it's not a machinery, it's not a factory, why is it valuable to me? So you need a deep understanding about this technology, and also a deep understanding about yourself in that sense. And I want to give you second set of sources. The first one is the research that I conducted on behalf of city workers, so CIOs of cities, who communicated. Let's see, I don't have a lot of these. Let me check. So now we need, I think, a little bit of bigger groups. Maybe you, the 6 of you, can have a look together, and then I will bring this one to the other side. So what you're now having right in front of you is basically a request from someone I worked with during my graduate thesis. He said cities have a problem. They see a lot of Internet of Things. They see a lot of companies having offerings for IoT data platforms. So those software platforms that help you to collect and analyze the data of sensors. But they don't have an independent research. They only have the sales story of those companies. And they want to be able to compare those different vendors and to understand what the added value, but also the risks are of working together with that specific vendor. So what they did is giving me the opportunity basically to conduct that research, to conduct a lot of interviews, combine them into one source. And that's the goal of this research, is first of all to show you, I think, how important it is, because after that, as you might be aware of, I'm now hired by one of those companies. So I could not have done that research when working for that company, that you have an independent source. And that's very difficult. Basically, you have knowledge institutions and universities. But that's about it. And even the knowledge institutions are oftentimes, funded by large organizations. So again, source validation is very critical here. And what you can do if you want to have a very brief but helpful understanding of which risks and opportunities there are, you can do the SWOT analysis. It's criticized sometimes by its easiness, how do I say, straightforwardness. Sometimes it's then by Porter, for instance, recommended to use 5 forces. But in this sense, it's not a competitive world. We're in the public sector. So that's why I recommend you to draft a very basic SWOT from the perspective of a city CIO, with the risks and opportunities that you can think of. And also there's a data source at the bottom of the package, another one. Exactly, and a dashboard. So pay attention to that and maybe draft your own SWOT. What do you think the risks are of working with a big vendor when innovating as a city office? What do you think the risks are, for instance, by working with a big office, big organization, when you want to innovate as a city?
Communication, that they aren't reliable when the city needs that.
How is it getting funding with the approval to get that project running?
Internally, within the government,
Yeah.
you mean? For sure. Other risks?
I'm not sure I expect that
And then the threats, those are the threats. So now you have to think about that from your part, like from inner. What makes it bigger? The first one is that the city has no fucking idea what IoT is. That's your biggest weakness. Lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge about IoT. Then the second biggest weakness that you have as a city is that because of the lack of knowledge, you also cannot produce or alter this technology, right? Which goes well with the trick that others develop it
from a virus, literally.
and internally, we have no control, no control of the development of these things. We can only
So
regulate.
they see what's happening, they understand the traffic, and by being able to benchmark to the rest of the world, they understand the risk of what's going on.
You would put the privacy now not as a weakness, because weakness is always internal. So strength and weaknesses are internal for you as a city CIO.
And if you're a startup, who are you going to ask?
And this is external, so we put data privacy misuse as a threat. As he was saying at the beginning, I mentioned the regulations and the companies can misuse this information. For example, Google puts cards and they basically photograph every single place. Before there are regulations about it, so now I will ask you, where would you put regulations then? The power of making regulations, where would you do that?
I think it's something of the public space. It's something citizens should
But what would you place it in the SWOT analysis? Is it a strength, is it a weakness, is it a threat or an
This is both a weakness and the strength.
overlaps?
Because it's hard to organize the debate if people don't know about the topic.
Okay, but that's the weakness that we already wrote, lack of knowledge or understanding about it.
Leading to weak decision making.
Yeah. But what she says is being able to regulate once you understand something because it's happening, that's your biggest weapon. So it's your biggest strength, is being able to enforce some regulations. We can write like power to enforce regulations.
Which requires having a debate on the issues around.
Yeah. What is the biggest opportunity? And this I already know the question, but I will. Remember, opportunity must be external, so it's not the city. It's somebody in the industry. What could you imagine that
I
is?
would say other companies in your city. Some companies you might know that could have a cooperation. You could develop cooperation with companies, like startups, to harness the potential, not just.
So can we say maybe, because you have to assume that these companies are not going to share this just because they want.
No, we need a public-private partnership.
Okay, so we can call it an opportunity because the external is maybe the pressure of the pressure of the public in general in front of these companies that can convince them something like this. I don't know. That's an opportunity, or maybe more social responsible companies growing from zero. These are opportunities, for example, but there are not many.
The opportunity is the benefits of the technology.
This is where it gets super brave. Imagine, okay, so you work for the city, you work for the state, police work for the state. Right? So the wet dream of every government is to be able to fully control their citizens. Nobody knows, but they always find excuses to control. Yeah. It's a temporary measure, and you use a right, like the right of privacy, and you never get it back. Because, example, NSA in USA, it was an action due to the 2001 to the terrorist attack. The NSA just to temporarily track everything. NSA still holds to the day, so I don't know what's temporary for you, but that's half a lifetime for some people, a third of a lifetime. So, yeah, this is where it starts getting, because your weaknesses and your strengths might swap, being able to use this technology yourself, track better your citizens.
Another weakness, we also the fact that technology are not always linked to your territory, your country.
Limited
It comes from something that is not grounded.
Closed
Any companies could be in
concerns about
in
security.
company could be anywhere, but the impact is on your territory, your citizens.
That would be a threat.
So but how do you regulate the internet or just the electronic?
So that with Internet of Things, so they can understand the quick Internet of Things is connected well by things that speak to each other. So Internet of Things is part of Industry 4.0 that you manage the fabric talks to you, telling you, oh, I'm going to get kaput, I'm going to stop working as a machine in 1 week. Give me preventive maintenance. That's one type. Another one is, cameras that are everywhere, that are able to connect to each other and send information. Maybe you, if you have your phone, and this is something similar, Apple developed technology.
Like when
that every phone that is an Apple can track another phone that is an Apple, even if it's off, and also a MacBook. Okay, here's cool. If somebody steals your phone, you will know where it is, right? But then again, that's information that is there. Imagine how it could be misbehaved. So, if you did something scalable solution where you can go, and this is something that you learn from sci-fi movies. Is imagine there's a concept that one day we will be able to prevent a crime before it happens.
To prevent what?
A crime before it happens. And there's already a really strong entity in USA that is artificial intelligence. Imagine if it's biased, the people that program the bias, the sets of data that they give is maybe a person might be more likely to program to do it, and then somebody's arrested without committing crimes.
And then maybe
Nowadays they use this to, for example, send police to places where there will be a riot or a strike.
Even for prisoners, they assess the risk of residents.
president, and they have his assistant.
And this is where it gets super great because
They have to.
I don't know which side to take, and I believe that we shouldn't be taking sides anyway, but sometimes things are needed, but once they are there, they never go back and they can be easily
They have
abused.
the co-workers now.
It needs to stay on the public space for debate and citizen decision. This is something
You're right.
Imagine a government says, so we want to have some little traffic cameras everywhere to see who's working.
already to
but
focus
when
on
they
like
know
on
and
this. I know
not
they use cameras
I don't want
just to recognize space, entering the space in the city,
the reputation is like
block something from entering. Today there will be terrorists. It's really noisy.
Manifestations after this guy got killed. Everybody has been protecting so George. So the police has been using all of the cameras and putting data sets of different faces to match them and to find out who the people are that go to this, so that they can track them on social media and know where they are going at all times. And just 2 days ago, government of China in the news, they are openly saying that now, with the amount of cameras that they have, they could start to track you and check 1 week to the back everything that has happened in every single camera, and then they could even, with enough time, 2 or 3 weeks, they could know who your friends are, where you work, what are you doing.
A lot of camera in the public space, but you don't know. And to be honest, you don't understand Chinese. Chinese don't care privacy. I feel like the safety is more important. That's
But that's the biggest
they sacrifice. They really do sacrifice.
Try to learn from each other.
Yeah, that's the biggest difference because that's the gap between
But how can he
the
then
Western
So like privacy is everything, but actually Chinese don't care.
This is the most cool thing because the strength, this is the moment where strength, if it's misused, it becomes your biggest weakness. You become the actor of evil. So
it's also
you could do that
what,
only when
I mean, in
it's
general,
a
it
closed
can
up
be
area where you have to
people,
put
like
the
they don't
ticket
care
mentioned like that.
their privacy. Yeah, but also you say privacy,
Yeah.
if there is
Because
one person or two that will be suffering because of misabuse of these things, the group won't care because it's only 2% on 1,000. But what is short, I think we should also care about these 2 persons, not only the majority.
That's important. I mean, I will tell you an example. I believe that we all gonna agree that safety matters, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to misuses, for example, you cannot say anything critical about the government of China while you're in China on the internet. You cannot criticize anything. There are some topics that are totally taboo, specific moments.
What about your platforms that you use, like Trains, Facebook, or WhatsApp?
Let's say at the time, when we troubleshoot data, then we can understand, then we can figure out how we're going to use it. So first, может заказывать as much as possible, and then figure out how to use it. Let's say bankers, they're like collecting the data, what you're purchasing. Thus, they don't know how they're going to use it. But they know what you purchased over years. Then at the moment, let's say when it's like around 10 years, then they will be able to make research. How much money you were spending let's say, on entertainment, how much money you were spending on clothes, how much money you were spending on food, what kind of
You have like a social currency. If you, for example, that one time you were, like you are criticizing this is social currency. And what happens is if you are, for example, criticizing the government, you can lose the right to go out of China.
I don't know that. I don't know that.
But how long have you been out of?
Huh?
How long?
Just 3 years.
All right, so that's the thing. It's like when you're in China, it's impossible for you to know this.
government always
So you have to be actively looking. And any of this information, if you go and try to find it, is systematically done, is systematically after the algorithm. What happens is all the companies, imagine like this, the more somebody reads something, the easier it will be to find, right? So if an article gets 100,000 views, then more 100,000 views will come. And also 100,000 views of ads means that the company that has this information wants to push it out. Sponsors pay more money per view. But if you have any critical thing to say against any government, that's not something that any sponsor, if you're Coca-Cola, will you like your Coca-Cola thing be associated, have your Coca-Cola can do something really, like a difficult topic? You don't. So that's systematically, as you see with the algorithm, it's placing your article in a second or third position. And all you have this information kind of gets stuck. That's why we were having our conversation yesterday. We do like our dangerous things, but a lot of super dangerous things at the same time.
So that's the thing. Okay, I understand your point. Like, just say, I understand
Okay, everyone, let's move on. Let's move on.
So basically,
Let's finish the discussion. Okay, thank you, everybody. Let's move on. Otherwise, we don't have time for questions and answers at the end. I'm very curious to see what you came up with. I heard some great discussions here. What I would like to do is, because I saw 3 different groups, is to give each group the opportunity to briefly present, maybe tell a bit about the discussions and the topics that that you found interesting to talk about, to think about, and to maybe share what you created in terms of the swap. If I may begin with the group here front. Can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah, basically the task was to analyze strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats of IoT platforms, and what we see is there are 2 approaches the cities are struggling in order to adapt to: the vendor approach and the platform approach. From the one hand, what we can see from the strengths of the vendor approach is the local adaptation, that you can use it for the local environment, and we stick on this, but for the platform approach, we see the opportunities of scalability, maybe some more marketing opportunities or collaboration with other big companies, speed of adoption, digital strategy reflection. The weaknesses, what we identified through the solutions that provide IoT platforms, like lack of clarity on data ownership or storage. So we don't know where is data stored, who would manage this data. For the smart cities, also limited capacities can be for the data storage, timing of adoption. So we need to compare also these two different perspectives, the vendor approach and the platform approach, which is faster. And do we need to be so fast to adapt it just like for the city, or do we need a scalable solution, or maybe take more time to elaborate more quality-based solution?
Very valid questions. And do you mind to try to answer those questions yourself? Do you mind, as a city CIO, if it's fast and if it's scalable?
I think it depends from the city. Like if it's like a big city like New York, of course I have like different big companies. Maybe I would at first review these two approaches, maybe just use the open ecosystem approach. So that I say, okay, I have many big companies in my located in my area, so why not to collaborate with them to discuss these two approaches? And I think I would stick to this open ecosystem approach because it gives more solutions to our city. I think it really depends on the city.
Yeah.
So
That's very good comment. And do you remember this one? The left one, internal analysis. What kind of city are you?
yeah.
Do you have, I mean, I did not say as a New York City CIO.
I understand, yes.
That's a great example. I mean,
we need to see the context, so where we are operating, where are we located, because there are different resources, there are different stakeholders with whom I collaborate. So I'm not just like coming out with one stakeholder and like bring his IoT solution for my city.
Yeah.
That is the point.
Great. And maybe some other comments on the work we did? No? That was valid comments. How can it help a city when the solution that they are using is scalable? When it's, for instance, used in other cities in the world, does it matter?
Maybe it can create some more entrepreneurial opportunities to use this data, to utilize it. Maybe it can help like the public hospitals to utilize some data, how it is, when the data is collected from people moving around in this particular area, especially with the influence of COVID, maybe it can be also helpful for the public hospitals also.
Yeah. Use cases, I hear the answer. Experience.
I'd like to add that when a solution is used in multiple places, when other places figure other solutions regarding that or other ways to apply it, it's very easy to import into your place. So it's like if the same model is used in other places, it's easy to incorporate the solutions or the external conclusions into your own model.
I will give you an interesting example. I went to a conference, a smart city conference in Barcelona 2 years ago maybe. I was talking with a high official of a Mediterranean country. He said, so we built this IoT platform ourselves. So basically we bought a startup that had the technology and we were building and building and building and building. And then now we have the best IoT platform in the world. And I said, okay, but if you want to expand and you want to move to another city, right? Is it possible? And he said, yeah, that's an interesting question actually. We have not thought, there's the mindset is very different in different places in the world. Some cities just want to work with big companies because they are the only one they trust. Some cities just want to work with startups because they want to provide local employment and don't trust large organizations. some cities want to work with their own organization and build it and never share. In terms of openness, a very interesting point, right? So there are different approaches, and there's also a very interesting comment that I learned, that I heard in the other group, is that there are also different cultures. So it's not that one solution is the best one, but it's definitely the case that there is a best solution for every situation.
And when the management changes, even the direction can change.
Everything can change. Everything can change, and it's very complex. So my compliments to to take this opportunity to think and talk about it, and for sharing the insights. But you can imagine that this is giving a CIO of a city a headache, and that it has a lot of benefits, but also downsides of actually moving into this direction, which also maybe explains a bit about the pace in which it's happening, right? But thank you for sharing. Maybe the group in the back, can you tell us a little bit about the SWOT that you just created?
So we had different discussions together. Just bear in mind that our CIO, between the 5 of us, might not be the CIO that will be hired to this job in most of the countries around the world, because it's possibly too ethically correct and doesn't have a political agenda. But in case that there is a country that will hire such a CIO, we will recognize that our strength and maybe our biggest weapon is the power to enforce regulations.
Citizen debates.
Yeah. And our biggest weakness is the lack of knowledge. You know, like in the state, even if you're the CIO and you're a total expert in IoT, connected world, Internet, Industry 4.0, you still need to convince people that totally don't understand this topic. So that's your biggest weakness, because everybody is susceptible to just like understand it wrong.
Yeah, it's hard to decide when you don't know really much the topic and the issues around it.
And another big weakness is that you don't directly have control over the development of these things. Unless, with the example, if you're working with startups, you could have some sort of influence on that, but that's not the topic that we didn't discuss. Biggest threat as misinformation and monopolization of information, like who's holding your information and for what purpose it's going to use. I mean, at the end, organizations are groups of people.
And so there is also the fact that it is very fast evaluating. Sorry, it's a fast evolution. So once you regulate, then there is new things that you didn't thought about to regulate. So it's always a never-ending run to try to put boundaries on this freedom, because citizens need to have some rights defended. So this is, I think, another.
This is definitely. I just wrote it down. This is awesome. We missed it as a group. We were.
Yeah, we just.
Yeah, we got together in the last 5 minutes. And yeah, big threat is data privacy misuse, and that other developed it, which goes to this topic. But there are some opportunities that we found, and it goes a little bit with the last question that you did to this group. And the opportunities that you can collaborate with other cities that might be using the same and try to learn together what works well or not. And a other one is that a lot of social responsible IT companies are in the rise with open source, that, you know, where every citizen theoretically could check into this source and say, okay, everything is transparent, they are doing what they are saying. And since it's open source, there are so many isolated that there are enough people always, you know, like suggesting patches for security problems that it might have. But yeah, but the biggest and most, the coolest message that we found, that we were in this like cool discussion, is that your strength can become your weakness, and your weakness your strength. You can. There's a really thin line that every society or culture has different about. For example, we had the issue of safety versus privacy. Yeah, and for every culture there's a different line, right?
Yeah.
So your biggest strength can become the biggest threat and weakness if you misbehave or misuse the information that you have. Yeah, they're sharing. They're with them. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything else.
No, I agree with you that there is also a cultural point, because this is a world that is all connected worldwide, accessible worldwide, but it's also grounded on different cultures, different realities that might not agree each other with how to regulate and how to decide things. That's it.
And have you also talked about price?
Yeah, from the early beginning.
Yeah.
It's always a big issue. Because none of us, I don't know, I'm not like, okay, so not none of us, but I think that maybe majority, even people who are like well educated, who are sitting in this room, they're not aware or like quite aware of actually what kind of traces we're leaving even when we're surfing the internet, like Googling something or doing anything, like writing a post when we're trying to buy some or purchase some product, or how other applications are actually spying on us. It's actually a big issue currently, and how they're managing to, why actually those companies are too expensive, yeah? So why do they cost like too much? I mean, the Facebook, the Google, the Amazon, why all those founders are so rich? Because of us, because we provide them for free the data, and the data costs money. The data, who we meet, the data, who are our friends, the data, what do we buy, the data, what we purchase, the data, how much phone do we use, what kind of phone, how much money do we spend on anything. And this is everything that they collect, we're living for them for free. And this is exactly the issue.
If the product is for free, you are the product.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
I have a question to your group. Two questions actually. The first one is, I think that's a very interesting idea, collaborating between cities. What kind of cities would you like to collaborate with?
Mine, like cities, will be the most common thing, I will say. But even through, as a person, I will say it makes more sense if you try to collaborate with cities that have other perspectives. But I don't see that happening.
There's also a problem with regulations because some cultural misunderstandings, or if you talk in terms of political regimes, it's something that, I don't know, privacy and safety. What is privacy and safety in Germany is totally different from privacy and safety in China, and people do not reach the common consensus about the implementation of this policy making, and this is why it's very hard. So for me, I cannot imagine it to be scalable on a global level because the systems themselves are so different that it's incompatible in their core values.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. So if I summarize correctly, you would like to collaborate with cities that are similar to yours.
It's more likely to happen. The other is almost impossible. Even though it might bring more benefits. But, yeah.
And another question, you mentioned misinformation. If we're talking about smart cities and IoT in cities, so let's say we measure whether a parking spot is available or not, and we communicate it on big signs. Or we measure if there's a person walking by and we turn off and on the light based on movement. Is that data that will be misinterpreted? Is that disinformation that can affect your city, or is it more a technical issue?
I have an example, but I'm not gonna take this one because it wouldn't add to the conversation. I believe misinformation in this case is okay. Stay in USA because it's a really nice example. During all the Black Lives Matter things, they are collecting a lot of data from all the people, taking all the posts, taking all the images. Yeah. And there is a big institution that almost nobody knows. Some like NSA, nobody knew, but it was always there. I forgot the name. I can tell you after like 5 minutes of Googling. But what they do is that they have been using artificial intelligence to kind of frame by how you look if you are more likely to commit a crime. Yeah. And the fun thing is that if you use, there are many ways of doing this, right? And it's basically by just giving a lot of inputs of data. But you can have a racial bias that if you're only giving, more white males as information, then the information about black females might be way less accurate. And then you could super quickly make a super educated decision with the numbers that you have, even if your numbers are telling you the wrong story. And then things can go super quickly wrong.
It's an interesting example. On the same conference that I went to, there was Huawei was presenting their new solution of the IoT platform, and it's also in the research. And they had a big booth with a lot of screens like all the other vendors did, but their solution was new. So I went there for a demo, and without judging, just as an observant, I was able to follow people walking on the streets while they were being identified on a European conference in Barcelona. So there was basically an Asian company entering the European market with a value proposition that did not fit the local values. Whereas in their home country and surrounding countries, there are very big and successful solutions. Why? Because they want to achieve different things, simply. So they understood their customer and developed a solution accordingly. But this is again an example that one solution does not fit every place. Yes. And it's very, very important to understand where you are. Yeah. And as a tip for you all, if you are ever in a situation in which you have to evaluate different solutions, ask them what they want to achieve. It's as simple as that. Can be as simple as that. What do you want to achieve? Because if you understand what they want to achieve, you can also understand if that matches what you want to achieve, right? And sometimes you go all the way with this beautiful story, and in the end to find out that the goals were different. And there was just a misalignment of values, of purpose, of whatever. So bear that in mind, that it's not good or bad, or right or wrong. It's just different to begin with, and try to understand the differences.
Yeah, right. But it's incredible how now, for example, with the worst country that the worst country in terms of how they treat the whole COVID situation is definitely USA. There's no like worst case scenario than what they are doing. They just use data to explain, for example, why all children need to go back to school. And then you see the people that are in front of, like the chairman, like it's a woman, she is in charge of all the private schools. And if you start understanding what will happen with all of this, you see, yeah, okay, like a lot of, like hundreds of thousands of children will die because of this. And teachers and parents, because they want you to go there and separate. But for these people that have this political agenda, if something like this happens, then more private schools will follow, because people think, well, okay, public schools, people die. In private schools, everything seems to be working better. And it's just incredible. It makes me angry just to see what people go and say in front of TV. And you know, it's so obvious, but most of the people are uneducated in these things. Most of the people don't understand the technologies.
So,
yeah.
So that's the last thing I want to point out before giving you the word to share your insights, and then we move on to the last exercise. I suggest that the Q&A we skip because we talk a lot. And if you have any questions, I'll be here for the next days, so feel free to reach out.
What was the point of doing this exercise?
Sorry?
What was the point of doing this exercise?
The point of this exercise is to show the complexity of innovating as a city. That there's a clear advantage for specific technology, but in order to get to a point that it provides value to your city, you have to evaluate so many different aspects, both vendors, but also what kind of culture you have, what you would like to achieve, that it's way more than implementing a technology. And I think it's very valuable to hear different insights and different stories, basically, that bring you to a point in which you understand that complexity.
Theodoor, it would be amazing if you could also share like your experience working in IBM, like your first expectations, and then when you face the reality, and now after you have the experience, like how was that? Just shortly, if you could explain that you thought already that okay, so in the beginning I was like very excited, wow, let's go there. It's very trendy. So they told you, okay, so take it easy, guy. Yeah. We have it already like on hold like for 30-40 years. So how was it for you to be like from the beginning to now? How your perspective changed? How would like your actually? How do you look at things now?
Honestly, I think it's an interesting question. Thank you for asking. So very briefly, when I left university, I was very passionate about cities and Internet of Things. And I thought that's why I also did the research. And I knew about the IoT platform of IBM, weaknesses and strengths, so they hired me amongst other things for that reason. When I entered and I look at the projects that you can be working on, none of them is with cities in this sense. So they're simply not that mature, that they roll out big IoT platforms on a city scale. But I still prefer to work with public sector because I think that's a very powerful combination, public and private. So I started looking for projects that are similar to smart city projects, and then I ended up with ports and airports. Because it's on the cross-section of public and private. You have semi-public organization, but with big financial resources. Most of the time, ports and airports are wealthy in general. Current situation, difficult, but in general, very innovative. And what I also learned there is that you have a different situation in ports compared to airports, because in airports you have to deal with people, and in ports you most of the time have to deal with containers. And that's a very interesting difference, because on airports you talk very easily about measuring temperature and all the safety and security risks, and a lot of these discussions are happening still with people, very complex. But on the other hand, you also have the technical part. And that's why I personally changed my mind. I thought it's great to do something for people and inhabitants of a city. And I changed a little bit my mind in that sense. I hope that answers your question. That I want to do it indirectly. So I focus now on the machines and the, let's say, the assets, enterprise asset management. You can measure a lot. It doesn't matter. It won't care about security risks, and you don't have to feel guilty because you don't know enough about it to actually work on a daily basis. And that's also a big difference between IBM and other big tech companies that you might know, Google, Facebook, you name it, Amazon. They also have a customer branch. Actually, Amazon promotes itself by saying we're the most customer-oriented company in the world. Everything is focused on delivering service. But if you are delivering services to people, but also selling technology, you have a very big challenge here. And I'm afraid that in the upcoming years we will see quite some issues, especially if we talk about IoT in smart home. That was a big sale pitch. IoT, smart home, we put sensors everywhere and it will help you to live a nice life. And then in the end it turned out that everybody was being measured, and is still being measured, for better or worse, without judging again. But we'll see many examples in which also these big companies, they basically excuse themselves for measuring so much without having a clear goal in mind. And I'm afraid that they had a clear goal in mind, but it was profit. So, and there's the difference between delivering services and earning money. And that's what I learned over the past year and a half. That I think it's better to, right now, at least at this early stage, focus on the machine instead of the people. And try to automate processes rather than make people's life better with technology that needs a lot of discussion and debating before you can actually implement it in a safe way. So that's what I learned.
There's also like exists a bias, because so maybe you have a clear view on values, the pure values on how making to make people's life better and easier, more comfortable and more safe. But let's say what happens next when, let's say, you will be replaced by another guy who will not have the same vision, or your boss will not have the same vision, or your company that you will work for, or purchased by the guy with more money in the pocket, who has like different perspective how to use your technology, and then your technology will be misused and against you as well.
Yeah, that's true. There are always checks and balances that you can put in place to make sure that you avoid some of those risks. By, for instance, gradually scaling. You take easy to understand use cases, you implement that in a very low fashion way, and then you can scale. The sooner you get a better understanding, you feel more comfortable with that technology. I think in the meantime, this one switched off. I think I did it myself. It's working. So the last exercise, and also paying attention to the time, because I find the discussion more important than everything.
Tell us at the beginning, what is
1 second, please. 1 second. So guys, we have a third exercise, and I would like to ask you basically if you want to do it, or want to keep talking. The third exercise, my idea behind this was first you look a bit at trends. What do they mean? What kind of sources am I providing with? Is this reality? Is this important to me? Then you have a risk and opportunity analysis. If I want to pursue with this idea, or if I want to realize, implement technologies or realize a plan, what do I need to care about? What do I need to think about? What's the complexity behind that decision? And the third one is to actually come up with a plan, a recommendation or strategy to, in this case, a city board, in which you say, we had a look at the technology, we had some interesting discussions, and based on our current findings, we present you a plan or strategy, and it can be as simply as you should do ABC because of ABC or DEF. Right? It can be as simple as that. So to have a clear communication about what you just learned, and you can pick a city yourself, or you can also say, actually we have some questions we would like to ask each other or you, or we want to share something, and we can talk a bit longer for 10 to 15 minutes, and then have a coffee break. So let's do it by voting, very democratic way. Who says, yeah, I would actually try to formulate a very easy to understand strategy for a city board about IoT and AI. Let's raise hands. All right.
I can, but it will take too long.
It's also very hard. I think I don't have so much examples of very concrete things about how do you implement smart cities solutions. So I don't have an idea of a plan, a very realistic plan. It's vague for me.
So to give you a very easy to understand example, you could, for instance, say, as a consultant to a city board, since it's such a complex technological development, we recommend you to start with a waste management case, IoT case, in which you put sensors in the waste bins and you measure how much waste there's in those bins. Why? First of all, it gives you a bit of an understanding of how IoT works, how an IoT data platform can be applied to your city to add value in a specific way, namely reducing costs. Two, because those waste cars, the trucks, they're driving around and emptying those bins every time again without knowing if they're full or not. Right? So as soon as there's waste on the ground, somebody might give a call and say, yeah, it stinks always, it's annoying, please fix it. But if no one is doing that, it will be the same truck driving around all the time with the same waste bins. So you don't have an understanding what your capacity is, and there's a car driving around and blocking the way all the time, basically. So that can be, reduced in that sense. So you learn about IoT, you reduce cost, and what you can also do is, for instance, ask the people in the city, in the streets, to engage with the plan. So you make them aware of what's happening, how sensor technology can help reducing an issue in their street. And if they are willing to have those sensors in their street or not. And it's a very basic, maybe stupid example, but it can be a way to start a discussion about technology in an open public space. And that's a way, a trigger, how you learn about what kind of people are living in your city or in your town. Are technology advanced people who like to have technology around that can actually do some work for them? Is it risk avoiding? We don't want to have to do anything with this because it's technology and it will be misinterpreted and it's dangerous and it will take over our street. You know, you learn a lot about that. And so on one hand, you learn a bit about technology. You can pick a different use case, lighting, parking, it doesn't really matter. But you've got to start somewhere, I would say, to learn about it, to have a discussion about it, and to save you some money and deliver actual benefits. So you gain the confidence and the trust that it can help you, that it actually works, and that you can see on the dashboard that I also included in the sources, what's happening. That you can measure power consumption, that it might help you actually to reduce footprint in your city, to contribute to a larger goal, and all these kind of things that IoT in the end can be a tool for to achieve something.
I have a question. This is personal to you. Do you see any, for example, disadvantage or any bad part of? Because this is a really nice example. It's IoT. It's simple to understand, and at first hand, it's everything good, right? Like, yeah. I mean, when my trash is full, somebody will come and clean it rather quickly. But if I ask you now, because you have, I guess you have thought a lot about this example. Did you find any disadvantages of that, or any problems that this could cause in a city, in the society?
Yeah. So it's a very innocent example. That's also why I picked it. For this specific example, you could say that if you need to replace batteries, it still costs you effort and also maybe money. But that's a relatively minor disadvantage. I think the biggest advantage, but we're very far away from that, is that people become too dependent on the technology and the data that they receive. They think that the sensors will tell them the truth and they stop thinking, right? So they just look at the dashboard and they say, dashboard is green, city is okay.
So if something, basically here, if technology goes wrong by any chance, it means a huge pile of trash, literally. Somewhere.
In the city maybe,
yeah.
But it's in general with Internet of Things. I mean, you can measure, but the risk is not necessarily in the data itself, but in the interpretation of the data.
Yeah.
I would say. Yeah. And also, so security is a risk for the public sector, right?
I believe that, you know, the problem that can start, because it's a really nice example again, is with the options that you have with this information. Okay, you produce more trash, you pay higher taxes for, I don't know, cleaning the city and so on. But what if you start using the data in other ways that wasn't intended at the beginning? Like, okay, this person has 2 households, but this household is not producing any more trash.
Yeah.
But it's the primary one. I don't know, something like this, you see? So you can start being applied for all the topics. And just tag to a specific location. I mean, it's a geolocation, then what kind of argument? It's not my trash, even when it's right in front of your house. I don't know. I'm just trying to think if there are any disadvantages in such a project. I like the one with dependency.
There is also something about trashes, that the company usually try to put the responsibility on individuals about the trashes, or you're not separating properly your trashes, or you produce too much trashes. But this is also like a paradigm that we don't question. Like, is that something individual, or is that on who produced the storage package? Is there any other solution we could have to have less packaging, more biodegradable, destructing. Yeah, it could also, as you say, be punishing, like, oh, you're producing too much trash, you will have a fine, etc. So it leads to many things. Yeah. It's not only just sensors in trashes, in bins, it's many other questions that comes with, I think.
Maybe to close with.
Maybe even abuse the system. Imagine you just like to have your trash empty every day, and a single chew gum based on the sensor or a single weight on a pressure plate does the job that the car is going to come and clean your house every day, even if it's at 1/4 or 1/5. I don't know.
So what I hear is a very interesting thing, maybe to close with, is the intention, right? So and it also comes back to what you said. If people are replaced, you have a new boss, you have new this, you have new insights. The world changes all the time. What happens with the data that was collected in the first place? And that's a big concern for many people. And I would say in this case, write down and agree upon why the data is collected, and make sure that if it's being used for a different use case, there is a new decision to be taken before you can actually do that, with the right checks and balances in place to make that not a solo decision, right? So you can measure waste, for instance, to reduce traffic costs for traffic trucks. But as soon as you are going to say, we are now going to tax people based on the amount of waste that is collected in their street, you have a completely different situation. And then you first agreed with delivering that data and gathering that data, and then it backfires because you agreed to experiment with technology. So in that sense, you want maybe a contract in which you say, we are willing to participate in this, and that's why the engagement is so important. That you say, at least that's a European model, I would say, engagement in that sense, that you agree what is collected, that the data is not specifically yours, but you agree that it is collected, but it is yours in the sense that it cannot be used for something different than the initial purpose. And if so, you need to do something different. And that's a degree of maturity that cities need to develop, because we know a lot of examples in which cities were too late in that sense. And that's why I also think it's good that they move slowly. You know, collecting cars from Google Earth was one, but if we look at the last example, the smart thermometers in your house, they collect a lot of data on when you are at home. You know, it's very extremely sensitive information when you are at home, but also how much you are using, which rooms are using a lot. You know, all these different, is someone gaming at night? You know, you can learn a lot from what's happening from within that house. But the issue is that people sign up for things they don't understand. And they install those sensors before they read the agreement. And what's in the agreement, for instance, that the data that is collected from your house can and will be sold to third parties, and that no responsibility will be taken for the things that happen with that data. And everybody agrees, and then it's your own problem. So be critical, read, and don't act like you understand, don't pretend, try to understand, and otherwise just don't do it. Let that clarify and specify upfront why it is collected and what they want to achieve.
I think that the same with elections, when we were going to elect some politicians. It works the same way. We never know, like, what is really behind it.
You never know. You never know. Is there anyone else who would like to make a comment, or shall we take a coffee break?
Yeah, I think
let's have a coffee break.